Modern bridges are not built to last forever. 50 years, maybe 80, if maintenance budgets hold and inspections stay ahead of the damage. After that, concrete cracks, steel corrodes, foundations weaken, and engineers begin discussing replacement rather than preservation. That is the normal life cycle of a 21st century bridge. But what if I told you there is a bridge nearly 2,900 years old that still carries traffic today? Not a ruin, not a protected monument that nobody touches. A functioning bridge. Cars cross it, people walk over it, an entire community still depends on it. Nearly 3 millennia. We like to imagine history as a straight line of progress. Stone gave way to masonry. Masonry gave way to steel. Steel gave way to reinforced concrete. Concrete gave way to advanced composites. Each century supposedly improved on the last. Each generation supposedly built better than those before it. But what happens if we reverse the question? How many bridges built in 2025 will still be standing in the year 4875? Probably none. Yet several ancient bridges have already survived spans of time that make modern infrastructure look temporary. And here is the part that matters most. None of this required aliens. No lost superscience. No forgotten magic. Every one of these bridges was built by human hands, with tools we can name and methods we can explain. The mystery is not how they did it. The mystery is why we ever convinced ourselves they couldn't. Through this story, one pattern appears again and again. Mass, biology, precision. 3 kinds of engineering that ancient builders mastered so completely that their work still outlives ours. And the deeper you look, the more impressive it becomes. Our journey begins in southern China, near the mouth of the Luoyang River, where salt water mixes with the delta. Merchants of the Song-Dynasty faced a serious problem. The region was one of the busiest commercial hubs in the world. Ships loaded with silk, ceramics, and spices moved constantly through the area. Trade needed a crossing. Nature refused to cooperate. The riverbed was soft. Tides were powerful. Currents tore apart conventional structures. So Song engineers chose a method that sounds almost reckless. Instead of assembling spans from many smaller stones, they laid gigantic granite beams directly across the supports. Single blocks, some measuring 11 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 1 meter thick. Modern estimates place the weight of certain beams between 150 and 220 tons, and there were hundreds of them, 362 spans, stretching across roughly 2.5 kilometers of water. Together they formed the Anping Bridge, for centuries the longest stone bridge on Earth. Now consider the challenge. Today, lifting a 200-ton object requires specialized equipment, advanced cranes, steel cables, and detailed engineering calculations. None of those technologies existed in the 12th century. No diesel engines, no steel wire rope, no floating crane ships. Yet the stones are there. Not in drawings, not in legends, in reality. You can still walk across them today. So how do you place a 200-ton stone with no crane? You let the sea do the lifting. Song engineers floated each beam out on rafts at high tide, edged it into position directly above the piers, and then they waited. As the tide fell, the river itself lowered the stone onto its supports, gently, with a precision no machine could match. It was not brute force, it was patience, timing, and a perfect reading of the water. The very same tides that destroy modern construction were the tool that built this bridge. And there is a second detail that deserves just as much attention: the mortar. Researchers found that the bridge's mortar combined slaked lime with sticky rice. That sounds primitive, until laboratory analysis revealed something remarkable. The rice contributed amylopectin, a compound that formed microscopic structures inside the mortar, dramatically improving its strength and its resistance to saltwater corrosion. In some respects, it still performs better than modern, non-reinforced concrete. Our materials were supposed to be the future, yet this medieval recipe is still holding the sea at bay 900 years later. Already, the timeline begins to look less like a straight line than we were taught. If the Anping Bridge shows what patience can do with enormous mass, the next example breaks an even deeper assumption. Because these bridges are not built, they are grown. Travel to Meghalaya in northeastern India, one of the wettest places on Earth. Rainfall here can exceed 11 meters in a single year. Floods are relentless. Wood rots. Steel rusts. Modern footbridges demand constant repair. Nature always wins. Yet the local Khasi communities solved the problem centuries ago with a completely different idea. Instead of fighting the forest, they recruited it. Their material of choice is the rubber fig tree, which sends out long aerial roots that stay flexible while they grow. Villagers guide those young roots through hollowed-out trunks laid across a river. Year after year, the roots reach farther. They are woven together, strengthened, shaped by hand across generations. After 15 years, the roots may touch the far bank. After several decades, a person can cross. After a century, whole groups can walk over safely. And after hundreds of years, something extraordinary happens. The bridge grows stronger, not weaker, stronger. That single fact overturns almost everything modern infrastructure assumes. Concrete deteriorates, steel fatigues, coatings fail, and foundations crack. But a living root bridge repairs itself. Every season adds new growth. Every flood teaches it to adapt. The structure answers damage instead of merely resisting it. Engineers from the Technical University of Munich measured one of these bridges and found it could carry more than 50 people at once. Several tons of living, self-healing structure. One bridge in Nongriat even grew into 2 levels, a double-decker of living wood, unlike anything else on the planet. Others have shrugged off floods that swept away the modern steel footbridges built right beside them. And the most puzzling question is not how they work, it is why the idea stayed local. Rubber fig trees grow across Indonesia, Malaysia, even the Amazon. The concept clearly works, the results are undeniable. So why did this knowledge never spread? Why did one region quietly perfect a form of living engineering, while the rest of the world kept rebuilding the same bridges over and over? The answer tells us something uncomfortable. Progress is not only about discovering an idea. Sometimes it depends entirely on whether a society bothers to keep it. Now we move west, to the Roman Empire, in the early 2nd century. Emperor Trajan was preparing to conquer Dacia, a land rich in gold and guarded by one of Europe's most dangerous rivers, the Danube. To move his legions across it, Trajan demanded something the world had never seen. The man given the task was Apollodorus of Damascus, one of the greatest engineers in history. What he delivered stunned even the Romans themselves. Trajan's bridge stretched more than 1,100 meters, the longest bridge of the entire ancient world. Massive stone piers rose straight out of the riverbed. Above them stood enormous timber arches, each spanning a distance that would not be matched anywhere in Europe until the 19th century. Think about that. A record that stood for roughly 1,700 years. Roman historians admired it openly because it seemed barely possible even in their own age. But the real breakthrough was hidden beneath the water. To build the foundations, Apollodorus sank watertight wooden enclosures called cofferdams, pumped them dry, and poured hydraulic concrete directly into the riverbed. Underwater concrete. Many people assume that is a modern achievement, yet Roman engineers were doing it around the year 100, and European builders would not rediscover the technique until the 1800s. A coin minted in Rome and now kept in the British Museum still shows the bridge in full. Its arches, its piers, its name carved beneath. It is, in effect, the oldest photograph we have of a real engineered structure. And then something unexpected happened. The bridge was not destroyed by nature. It was not destroyed by war. It was dismantled by politics. Trajan's successor, Hadrian, ordered parts of the structure removed, out of military caution, or perhaps simple jealousy of the man who built it. One of the greatest engineering achievements of antiquity was deliberately taken apart. And yet, even now, stone piers from Trajan's bridge still stand in the Danube, after nearly 2,000 years. Still there, still visible, still proof that ancient builders aimed for permanence, not replacement. So let me ask you something. Imagine you were that emperor. Would you spend more time and treasure on something built to last 3,000 years? Or would you take the cheaper option, the one that needs rebuilding every few decades? It sounds like a question about history, but it sits at the very center of how we build today. Because durability is not only an engineering decision, it is an economic one. And the next bridge shows just how far ancient engineers were willing to go in pursuit of pure precision. In southern France stands one of the most celebrated structures the Romans ever built, the Pont du Gard. Most visitors admire how beautiful it is. Few realize how absurd its engineering really is. The bridge was only one piece of an aqueduct carrying water to the city of Nîmes. The source lay roughly 50 kilometers away. Over that entire distance, Roman engineers held the water to a total drop of just 12 meters. 12 meters, across 50,000 meters of terrain. That is an average slope of about 0.24 millimeters per meter, thinner than a coat of paint, maintained across the length of a marathon and back, without lasers, without GPS, without electronic instruments of any kind. Their main tool was the corrodes, a simple wooden level that used nothing but water and gravity to find true horizontal. Yet modern surveys confirm the slope stays astonishingly accurate along the entire route. At the deepest valley, the Romans raised the Pont du Gard itself, 3 tiers of arches, nearly 50 meters tall. Tens of thousands of tons of stone. Most of the main blocks were set without any mortar at all. Instead, the stones were cut so precisely that their own weight locked them together. Some weighed 6 tons and had to be lifted more than 40 meters into the air, using cranes powered by men walking inside giant wooden wheels. The closer you look, the less it resembles the crude image many people still hold of ancient construction. This was not primitive labor. This was sophisticated engineering. And above all, it was engineering designed to endure. The oldest bridge in this story might be the most humbling of all. Near modern Izmir in Turkey stands the Caravan Bridge, often called the Meles Bridge. Conservative dating places its origins around 850 BC. Some researchers believe it may be older still. But the exact date almost doesn't matter, because the scale of its age is hard to even hold in your mind. It is older than classical Greece, older than the Roman Republic, older than the founding of Carthage. It was already ancient when Pythagoras was alive, when the Buddha walked, when the first stones of the Parthenon had not yet been quarried. And it still carries traffic today. Pause on that for a moment. Picture every empire that has risen and fallen since this bridge was first laid. Kingdoms vanished. Languages were born and died. Religions spread across continents. Borders were redrawn 1,000 times. The bridge simply remained. Not because it was lucky, because it was built to last. A similar story waits far to the west, in Cologne. There, the Emperor Constantine commissioned a great bridge across the Rhine in the early 4th century. Later generations removed the upper structure, fearing it could let enemies cross the river. But the original oak foundation piles were left where they were, driven deep into the riverbed. Using tree ring dating, researchers traced some of that timber back to around the year 310. Those oak piles have now spent 17 centuries underwater, and many of them remain solid. The reason is not magic, it is chemistry. Sealed beneath the riverbed and starved of oxygen, the wood never gave the bacteria that rot timber a chance to do their work. Modern treated lumber often fails in a tiny fraction of that time. Again and again, these structures defy our expectations, not because they are supernatural, but because they force us to admit how much earlier civilizations truly understood. We began with a simple question. How long does a bridge last? The expected answer was 50 years, maybe 80. Instead, we found something else entirely. The Anping Bridge, where 200-ton beams were set by the patience of the tide. The living root bridges of Meghalaya, growing stronger with every passing year. Trajan's bridge, with underwater foundations centuries ahead of their time. The Pont du Gard, holding a slope finer than a brushstroke across 50 kilometers. The Meghalaya Bridge, still working after nearly 3,000 years. Constantine's oak piles, intact after 17 centuries beneath a river. Different cultures, different continents, different centuries. Yet the same theme runs through all of them. These builders were not designing for quarterly budgets. They were not designing for replacement cycles. They were designing for permanence. And that forces an uncomfortable question. Have we really become better at building? Or have we simply become better at building cheaply, quickly, and over again? Those are not the same thing. Modern engineering can do extraordinary things. We raise towers ancient architects could never have imagined. Our materials science keeps advancing. Our computers model stresses down to the millimeter. But durability is its own separate measure. And on that measure, some ancient builders are still almost impossible to beat. Perhaps we did not lose their knowledge. Perhaps we lost their priorities. A bridge that lasts 3,000 years is wonderful for a society, but it is terrible for a replacement contract. It creates no recurring construction cycle, no rebuilding program, no future budget to approve. In purely economic terms, eternal infrastructure is strangely inconvenient. History is usually drawn as a ladder, each generation climbing higher than the last. But reality may look less like a ladder and more like a landscape. Some peaks belong to the future, others belong to the past. The builders of these bridges understood something our civilization keeps forgetting. Longevity is not an accident. It is a choice. Every stone, every foundation, every decision reflects what a society values most: speed or endurance, cost or permanence, convenience or legacy. The bridges that survived thousands of years are not only engineering achievements, they are messages. Messages left by people who fully expected their work to outlive them by centuries. And maybe that is the most remarkable part of all. Not that they built things capable of lasting millennia, but that they believed such a thing was worth doing in the first place. So here is what I will leave you with. If you had to build one thing today, meant to still be standing and working in the year 4875, what would you do differently? Tell me in the comments. I read every reply. The past is not always primitive. Sometimes it is simply forgotten.